going to do a Let's Play here of the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat versus the Super Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat. Now, the Genesis version I recorded earlier. The Super Nintendo version I'm playing right now. Now, of course, when these games came out, the Super Nintendo was known for not being as bloody and being pretty tame versus the Genesis version having all the blood and everything. Although when I was a kid, I always liked the Nintendo version better just because it had the better graphics and sound.
Sonya wins.
But then again, I find that the Genesis version today is much more responsive in the controls and everything. The Super Nintendo version almost has like this input lag to it or something. I don't know, I still kind of like it better. Most people don't. I don't blame them.
Scorpion wins. Fight.
I got the sound going through the Super Nintendo right now. And some of the fatalities were still in here. The ones, basically the ones without the blood, like Scorpion's fatality, Sonya's fatality. That's about it. Raiden's was kind of in there, but instead of making their head explode, it turns them into ashes. Well, the Super Nintendo has this weird glitch to it that people don't really realize. If you jump and press the jump kick button right away, you don't recover from the jump kick. You basically hold the jump kick throughout the entire jump, and you could kick them almost every time. Where normally on the Genesis version and also the arcade version, you want to hit your jump kick like right before the peak of the jump, and they won't block it. I remember a couple of friends of mine back in high school, when we picked this version of the game up, we also had a Game Genie, and the Game Genie code came out that changed the sweat color to red, so it kind of looked like blood. Wasn't quite rated mature, but close enough. We were happy with it.
Scorpion wins. Fight.
So as far as the look and the sound effects and music, this game definitely translated much better from the arcade than the Genesis version. But it didn't have like the beginning cutscenes before you started the game, or the little cutscenes when you beat the game. It just kind of had your character posing, just kind of showing the ending with text, where the Genesis did have that version, or did have that stuff in it. So that was one thing the Genesis version had over the Super Nintendo, with the exception of the blood in the gameplay. My favorite was actually the Sega CD version. Unfortunately, my Sega CD doesn't play my Sega CD version of Mortal Kombat, so I gotta get that fixed. Might do a future video on it or something.
Scorpion.
Yeah, even if you like watch the Super Nintendo version, Scorpion hits a spear and pulls him over. He doesn't like have that delay. He kind of reacts a little too fast compared to the arcade version. Where we're on the Genesis version right there, kind of his movements match the arcade a little better. course, the pit version, or the pit fatality on the Super Nintendo version still looks pretty good. They don't show all the heads of the developers down in the pit like the arcade version does, though. Even in the Genesis version, they don't show it. Probably to save memory.
Scorpion wins. Fight.
So this game originally came out in the arcades back when I was in junior high school. Some friends of mine, we would all go to the arcade or the pizza place down the road from our junior high school, and we'd play Street Fighter 2, and of course that was like the biggest game that had ever come out at the time. And then one day I walk into the arcade, and there's this group of people hanging around this new machine, and the machine was facing away from us when you walked into the door, so we didn't notice what game it was. So we walked over, played Street Fighter like we normally did, and not as many people were playing it. Spent all our money on it, and then waiting a half hour for my mom to come back and pick me up, I started to notice what game they were all huddled around, and it was Mortal Kombat. Everyone thought it was just the most amazing thing ever. A lot of it was also not just the blood and stuff, but the graphics. Because this game had just come out, and no one even knew about the fatalities yet, but people were still huddled around it, and I thought it was just the most amazing video game I ever saw. Which is kind of why I don't mind the Super Nintendo version over the Genesis version, because of the graphics and everything, because it was the graphics and the gameplay that sold me on this game before the blood. I didn't even realize about the blood and fatalities until a couple weeks later when I actually started playing it. But I went to school the next day, and of course we're all talking about Street Fighter with our Electronic Gaming Monthly and GamePro magazines and whatnot, and I was telling everyone, dude, there's this new video game at the arcade, it's called Mortal Kombat, it's better than Street Fighter. And no one believed me. And then a couple of days later, my friend Scott went to the arcade and came back to school the next day. Dude, I saw Mortal Kombat, it was the greatest thing ever! That's how Mortal Kombat got big in our town. And my arcade had the prototype game. For anyone that's never played the prototype version of Mortal Kombat 1, there's some of the machines out there where the movements and characters and stuff, or the movements and everything were slightly different. Like, for example, if you were to jump kick someone, they would fly up in the air just a little bit more, or they would react, they would recover faster from moves on a couple specific moves, like Sub-Zero Slide. So you can actually pull off some really good combos in that game. And it was actually a much better game than the regular version. I've been seeing the boards to those machines on eBay going for about $300 now. Every once in a while. For those that play on emulators and stuff like that, if you ever have a chance to play the prototype version of the first Mortal Kombat, definitely give it a shot. It's a much better game. It's not a huge gameplay difference. The core gameplay is still exactly the same, but just those little touches make it a lot more fun. I'm playing the Super Nintendo version. I'm getting my ass kicked right now.
Scorpion wins. Scorpion. Fight.
So I think if this version didn't have that input lag problem, compared to the Genesis, I think a lot more people would actually appreciate this version of the game over the Genesis version.
Scorpion wins.
Like I said, my favorite version is actually the Sega CD version. Even though they messed up on one of the audio tracks, the first level it plays the wrong audio track. That's okay. It was like the perfect blend between the two versions of the game.
Scorpion wins. Fight.
I always thought the sweat looked more like they were knocking sand out of him or something.
Johnny Cage wins. Fight.
And of course, Johnny Cage, based off of Van Damme from Bloodsport. And of course, the Genesis version I was playing with a 6-button controller. If you're going to play Mortal Kombat on Genesis, I highly recommend using the 6-button controller. I am getting my ass kicked. There we go.
Scorpion wins. Fight.
Shit. Oh, man.
Johnny Cage wins.
And the Genesis version playing in the background that I was recording and playing earlier, and so it's like I'm wasting myself here.
Fight.
Johnny Cage is always a pain to jump away from because he does that shadow kick. One major difference in the gameplay that both versions of the game are guilty of is in the endurance matches. When the second character comes out on the arcade versions, they kind of stand there for about a second so you can kind of get a free hit. Or in these ones, they start fighting you right away. Ah, shit, uppercut on there.
Johnny Cage wins. Fight.
Crap.
Come here. Test your might.
Of course, Test Your Might after this game wasn't in the game and didn't make a didn't make a return until the 5th game on the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube. So now, like the Genesis version there has the nice little cutscenes. With the Super Nintendo, to beat this version, you'll see that doesn't have that. But then again, the endings on the Genesis version are kind of a little cheaper because it doesn't play like an ending music theme. It just plays the stage theme.
Scorpion wins. Fight.
Another glitch that I remember noticing when this came out is Raiden's lightning projectile. Once it flew about halfway across the screen, the animation on it would actually stop. I don't know how many people actually noticed it. I always thought it looked funny.
Scorpion wins.
Instead of saying fatality, it says finishing bonus. Nintendo didn't even want the game to say fatality.
Fight.
Graphics of the Super Nintendo, just overall, still amaze me to this day. And yes, I was more of a Nintendo fanboy growing up than I was Sega.
Scorpion wins. Fight.
Of course, the Sega Genesis was technologically superior Sega Genesis had a better CPU, not overall technologically superior, but it had a technologically superior CPU. Where the Super Nintendo had pretty much a better everything else. There's a comparison video that Ben Heck did, where he did a teardown and a good comparison of the Genesis versus the Super Nintendo. It was really, really detailed. I recommend everyone watching that. Oh, there we go. Ooh, nice. Thought I was gonna die there.
Scorpion wins. Fight. Come here.
Of course, the arcade version never said round one fight when Girl dropped down. It just
Scorpion
went right
wins.
to a battle.
Fight.
But back in the day, getting a perfect arcade port to a console was really difficult because of the difference in hardware. The first game to really do that and do it really, really well was probably Street Fighter II: The World Warrior on Super Nintendo.
Test your might.
Ooh, barely got that. Kind of weird how they have the test your might at a different spot in this version. It's after the Goro fight. Normally it's before the Goro fight.
Fight.
I don't think any of these versions that Shang Tsung throws the fireballs correctly.
Scorpion wins.
Normally in the arcade version he throws about 3 or 4 in a row, but on both home versions only one's displayed on the screen at a time. Thankfully that wasn't a problem with Mortal Kombat's 2 and 3 on the home ports.
Sonya. Sub-Zero. Scorpion.
And of course the endings on this, with the exception of the cutscenes,
Kano.
look much better on the Super
Johnny
Nintendo.
Cage.
But the controls on this are a little harder to play. I almost find myself liking the Genesis version more nowadays. Right there, it's not the cutscene, it's just Scorpion posing. Which they probably did that to save memory space. Memory was very expensive back then. And I'll switch the sound over to the Genesis version for a good comparison. Ooh, good pit fatality. I always found it weird that the music to the Genesis version was kind of off. Like, it didn't sound much like the arcade, with the exception of the first stage. It wasn't too bad, though. The way both systems processed sound was really different, though. The Sega had that Yamaha sound chip in it. That kind of, it was like a synthesizer. It was a very popular chip for keyboards and stuff like that in the 80s. Where the Super Nintendo actually took sound samples of instruments and then it would change the pitch up and down to simulate the notes. So that's why the Super Nintendo was the first console to have music that actually sounded a lot like music. But if you get a good composer that knows how to make music on something like that, that knows how to make really good electronic music, you can get some really good, if not even, in some cases, better electronic music on the Genesis than the Super Nintendo. Like Earthworm Jim is a perfect example of that. Came across a YouTube video the other day where someone took that sound chip and was making music off it, some professional sound guy, and he was remixing music from old Super Nintendo games onto Genesis hardware, and he actually knew what he was doing, and it sounded really good. Of course, there's the PG fatality for Sub-Zero on Super Nintendo. Still not a bad fatality, just no blood. I always found it funny that they actually put that in their arcade version of Mortal Kombat 2. That kind of similar fatality. Looks cooler then, though.
Finish him.
Of course, the Sega version of Mortal Kombat, they saved a little bit of extra sprite memory by having Sub-Zero use the same standing animation as Scorpion. But like I was talking about earlier, with little gameplay differences that are a little better on the Genesis, like when someone gets hit with the ice, they kind of do that shaking thing when they get frozen. A little more authentic to the arcade. I like how she still screams even though she's frozen in ice, being broken up. Of course, there's another kind of a glitch that they never fixed in the Super Nintendo version, is when two projectiles are in the air and one player gets hit first, the other one kind of disappears. That never happened in the arcade.
Fight. Finish him.
So I remember a month after this game came out in the arcades, because every magazine that came out for video games was just had something on Street Fighter every single time. Even if it was nothing new, they always find some kind of article to do on Street Fighter. Which there was always some, because there was a home version coming out or something. But about a month after Mortal Kombat came out, you started seeing on magazine covers, like, what will it take to beat Street Fighter in the arcades? Maybe Mortal Kombat. So then, of course, you started seeing the versus articles, what game's better. Ugh. Alright.
Fight.
This is making me want to go buy a Model 2 Sega CD right now, so I can play the Sega CD version. Of course, now there's lots of home ports of the arcade version on modern consoles. But back in the 90s and even the early 2000s, these were your options.
Fight.
But yeah, they got the Mortal Kombat arcade collection on the 360 in Steam, and the Midway Arcade Treasures on the PSP has it, and Mortal Kombat Deception on the Xbox, the special edition, had this game as well. Although those have like a weird sound glitch in the second stage where it doesn't play the music for some reason. But the gameplay works perfectly fine. See, now that's a fatality. Ripping their head out and their spine hanging down.
Fight.
And for anyone wondering, I am playing this on official hardware. I'm not using emulators or anything like that. And Genesis version had very little voice work in it. It said fight and it said get over here, and I think that's it. Didn't have the names of the characters or anything.
Finish him. Fight. Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah, the gameplay in the Genesis version translates from the arcade version almost perfectly.
Fight.
I always thought it was funny how Mortal Kombat 1 on Super Nintendo, the names over the energy bars versus Mortal Kombat 2 and 3, where they had the names below the energy bars for some reason.
Finish him. Fight. Fight.
Notice a little Easter egg in this game over here. I'll show you guys. You look above that little red door right there. You'll see Pac-Man and the Pac-Man ghosts on the wall. Since this game was published by Midway. As far as I know, that's in all versions.
Fight.
One version of this game I've always been curious to play, I've never played, is actually the Game Gear version. Maybe one day I'll come across it and play it. A friend of mine back in junior high had the Game Boy version because he didn't have a Super Nintendo or Genesis. It was not that good. Probably the worst version of Mortal Kombat ever played was the Mortal Kombat Advance on the Game Boy Advance. Horrible game. I was so mad at that game that I shrink wrapped it at my work and returned it back to Walmart and told them I got the wrong game. Exchanged it for Street Fighter. Game Boy Advance Street Fighter. Game Boy Advance version of Street Fighter is really, really good. And the Game Boy Advance is very powerful hardware for its time. So they should have been able to port a Mortal Kombat game over to it easily. Oops. Ah, crap. So yeah, that's Mortal Kombat, both the Genesis and Super Nintendo. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Johnny Cage. Kano. Fight! Excellent. Finish him. Fight! Fighting my buddy! Finish her! Fighting my... Raiden wins. Fight! Fighting my buddy! Raiden wins. Fatality. Test your might. Test your might. Finish him. Excellent. Finish him. Raiden wins. Sonya, Sub-Zero, Scorpion, Liu Kang, Raiden, Kano, Johnny Cage. Sonya, Sub, Scorp, Luke, Raiden, Kano, Johnny, Sonya, Sub, Scorp, Luke, Raiden. Johnny K. Yeah! Kano. Raiden. Liu Kang. Scorpion. Sub-Zero.